moving towards Qawwali, Nusrat Ali Khan tribute
Yes.
tours. Uh, would you would you describe this as a natural continuation of your past work, or does it signal a more deliberate shift?
It's
It's
actually
actually
both,
both.
because
Because
way back in 2012, I was asked by the Aga Khan Institute in Delhi to, they basically commissioned the first 10 kalams that Amir Khusrow had composed, which is, Manpunto Mola, Chap Tilak, all of those classics, right?
right?
And they
Yeah.
said,
And
well,
they
we
said, well,
want
we
you to sort
want
of
you
like
to
come
sort
up
of come
with
up with
your kind of
your
like
kind of like
interpretation of
interpretation of
these.
these.
And
And
so at
so
that
at that
point,
point,
I can
I
like
can like
set about doing arrangements for those very traditional qawwalis, and that was with Javed singing. And this is way back in 2012. So that was my first sort of like foray into dealing with qawwali. And then many years later, like almost a decade later, around about COVID time, which is when I wanted to sort of like start. When COVID hit, I wanted to sort of like preserve and record traditional music around Lahore, which is my home city, as you know. And I started on the quest of like finding the most outstanding people who were invested in traditional music. And so that started that series. And the first person to record on that is the person that I'm currently doing the Nusrat tribute with, which is Shahzad Ali Khan. So it was kind of like this natural shift where I had some experience with working with Qawwali, and then I started this traditional music series, and that introduced me to Shahzad, and then that association led to this idea. Once I was in Canada and working with the Aga Khan Museum, basically posited the question that, like, because that museum is a tremendous museum of Islamic art, and it's got like, art and music and stuff from all over the Islamic world. And I basically wanted to contribute something which was very Pakistani. And I asked them that, would they be open to sort of like us doing a commemorative sort of like tribute to Nusrat, where we would redo the 1996 Night Song record, which is ostensibly Nusrat's last record with Real World Records. And the guy who produced that particular album was a Canadian producer, Michael Brook. So it was really his production style, which sort of like made that record sound so unique. So I kind of like wanted to carry on from that and bring in my sort of like style and sound to songs that were done on Night Song, and that's what started the whole thing. And the Aga Khan Museum and Amir Ali, who's the director of programming, they were really supportive. And
I
we sort of like, I went back and I worked for like almost a year on just putting everything together. And then we brought the program back out. In fact, we're going to try and do it again, if not this year, then the coming year, and maybe bring it to the US as well. And so that's what started the idea. And then I also did a documentary feature on the impact of that record on musicians generally and what it meant to people in Pakistan. So that documentary was also sort of like accomplished, and the Aga Khan is supposed to add on uh, bits and pieces from their side, which is primarily going to be, I think, interviews with the Canadian people who worked on that project with us. So yeah, so that's how the whole idea started, and yeah, it took a while to develop, but I think I had the right people to do it with.
with.
Yeah, I think that right, that makes sense. I mean, uh, I think what is interesting on a musical level about this transition is you've always been engaged in like more like rock based classical music,
Yeah,
and the Nusrat, sort of revisiting Nusrat, who's an interesting figure if you look at not just subcontinental music but also just like Pakistani music, because we have like icons like Mehdi Hassan and all these people who were associated with like Radio Pakistan. And
yeah.
I think like it's just from a musical perspective, what do you see as a fundamental difference between those forms of music, especially in how they function in performance and those things?
Sure. Well, Mehdi Saab was primarily a ghazal singer, right? And so that's romantic poetry. And what Nusrat really brought to the Qawwali tradition was he contemporized Qawwali in the sense that it moved away from just being about, you know, just spiritual content, and it became more contemporary and more sort of like, and it was much more sort of like immediate, and the subject matter was also sort of like, it diversified it. And I think that's one of the reasons why so much of his appeal was felt in India and in Bollywood, and it also then reached out beyond that into the UK with Peter Gabriel taking an interest in what he was doing. And it wasn't just the lyrical content; it was also the his vocal style and his presence, and like his he was a tremendous improviser. And I think the Qawwali medium really lends itself well to sort of like group participation. So like, unlike classical traditions, which are sort of like, where the artist is performing and you're just sitting there passively receiving receiving the improvisation and basically being pulled into this performance space. With Qawwali, it's very much like there's a back and forth thing where the Qawwal will say a line or say a couplet which really resonates with people, and then sort of like he improvises upon that. And now none of that is planned; it just happens based on reaction from the crowd. So there's much more of an immediacy and a back and forth dialogue between the audience and the performers. And also Qawwali, to me, I said this in another interview as well. It's sort of like, for me, it's like the Muslim version of gospel music, where it's got religious roots, but it's also contemporary in the sense that it talks about subject matters which are not just only religious. It's not just about religious personalities, it's not just about religious figures or religious events. It's also about very colloquial things that are happening in people's lives, like, traditions, culture, how they live, situations that have happened. So all of those are stories within the Qawwali tradition, which you'll find. A lot of them are.
One of the first recording studios, I believe, where he used to record was Waves Studio, right, in Lahore. And Waves
Yes.
was a Catholic studio of sorts
Yeah.
because there
Yeah.
wasn't infrastructure at that time. And it's kind
Yeah.
of interesting, like how he sort of connected. He's also saying gospel, I think, in Punjabi.
He did, yeah, yeah, he probably did. So I mean, all of these things, sort of like really led him to be a figure who had like a very sort of like broad impact because of all these reasons. And of course, he also did all the Amir Khusrow known written songs like Chap Tilak and Ziale Miski and all of those. There's all of that too. But one thing that kind of like marks him from many other Qawwali artists is that he was a very good composer. So he wrote a lot of the songs which have become classics now, right? So Kali Kali Zulfon se leke to, Dum Mast and all those songs, he composed those songs. He came up with those melodies. And so that is the difference from a lot of the kawals that I even hear now, who now just sing Nusrat. Basically, they're only singing his songs, but they're not writing their own stuff. Or if they are writing their own stuff, it's not that well known. So he kind of like broke that mold and really sort of like supercharged the tradition of Qawwali to bring it into a more modern era, to bring it into a more contemporary era, and to also make it accessible to other musical styles. It wasn't just that it was just Qawwali. He was willing to sort of like go and work with other kinds of styles and other kinds of aesthetics. So that aspect of his personality and the fact that he was willing to take his music out of Pakistan and work with people outside of Pakistan, that really impacted the way everything was perceived.
That's really interesting. And I think like we've seen many bands and artists attempt to cover Nusrat and often, like but it's not done with like, the treatment that I see that you were trying to aim for in the Aga Khan project. I think like
Right.
there's this element of, like, we have to preserve this artist and the essence of what he presents in terms of sound and music.
Yeah, I think part of that is, again, you see, going back to who's in your team, who's sort of like who are the people you're working with. Now, if you're trying to do a Nusrat tribute, it immediately makes sense to have an excellent Qawwali group as the centerpiece of that idea. It doesn't really make sense. I know there's a lot of pop artists who do a lot of Nusrat songs in their shows. It's like sort of like this standard treatment where they will, people who are not Qawwali artists are doing Nusrat songs and sort of like obviously trying to do it in their style. And I think that that's fine, but I wanted to do it in a way where it would be authentic, that someone who enjoys Qawwali and has heard Night Song and loves Nusrat would be very pleased, or would be very appreciative of what we were trying to do. So without taking away from the spirit of what Nusrat himself was all about, that's what my intent was, that it should sound like this is how it should have been done, and it should sound authentic, yet at the same time, it should have this contemporary edge to it. So those are the kind of things I was aiming for. And also to kind of like keep Michael Brooks's ambient aesthetic in there as well, so that when you listen to it, you're like, yeah, this sounds like something from Night Song, but it sounds something that Mekaal or someone like him would also do. So just trying to balance all those aesthetic things and stylistic works, just trying to make it work that way.
So you also did you engage with some of the unreleased material that they had or anything like that or
Oh,
no?
you mean, no, I didn't actually. We pretty much focused on the five sort of full length songs that are Night Song. And in some cases, we added on verses where, like on the record, Nusrat sort of like sung maybe one, like a chorus line, and
Mhm.
then that's it. There's no follow up verse section. So Shahzad ended up composing verses for some of the songs, and in fact, I should share all of the audio so that you can actually hear what we added on. And the challenge again was to make it sound like something that Nusrat would have come up with, and not to make it sound like something that, oh, you know, well, he did this, but now we've added on this. So it should seem, it should be seamless. That was the intent. And so in fact, once we get off this thing, I'll send you the songs, and I think you'll have a hard time picking out where Nusrat kind of like finishes and where Shahzad's thing comes in. So so that was the intent as well, to kind of like add on a bit of what we sort of like, because those songs, like there's certain tracks on Night Song where it's just one melodic portion, one verse or one chorus, and nothing after that. Now, if you're going to make a full length performance out of that, you need more sections to it. So there were cases where we added on stuff, keeping the spirit of the original in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, that brings me to your Rivayat project. I think it's like kind of a different project, but it also holds like a lot of personal value for you in terms of your own growth and evolution as a musician. I would say, right? Like,
Yeah,
what was
yeah.
the vision behind that? What? Why go down that route? Like I know that Pakistan and South Asian music has a very like certain trajectory that it pushes artists through. I felt like this was one of your other efforts to contribute back, you know?
Yeah, and well, the effort was really, over the last 15 years or so, we've had a very popular music program which has been very dominant and done a lot of good uh to the image of Pakistan, and brought in many wonderful artists. But I kind of felt that it was getting skewed more and more towards a pop music aesthetic, and I wanted to sort of like go back and capture things the way they were done old school, back in the 50s and 60s, where everybody would be in the room. It would be one take, live performance. That's the aesthetic we were going for. And to preserve it in its truest sort of like form as possible, not have like, technical trickery to improve it. It is what it is, and you sort of like record it the best way possible. So there was that. Then there was also, I was concerned that so much of this music is going uh unrecorded, and these families have invested, generations into this craft. So there was that, preserve that as well. That was an effort that I wanted to make.